Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
The day before our wedding, my fiancé stood up and announced he was leaving for my best friend. He had no idea that a month before I had already found out about their affair. When I put the folder on the table, his hands began to shake. Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say, you know, that somewhere deep inside, before your mind catches up, your body already knows. I didn't believe that for a long time. I thought it was something women told themselves after the fact, a way of reclaiming some dignity, some sense of control after they'd been blindsided. But now I believe it, because looking back, I knew. I just didn't want to. My name is Claire Aldridge, and this is the story of the best, worst year of my life. Marcus and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Austin. He was funny, attentive, the kind of man who remembered small things. What you ordered on your first date, the name of your childhood dog, your mother's favorite flower. I was 31, settled into my career as a project manager at a mid-sized architecture firm, and I thought I had finally stopped running from the idea of permanence. Marcus felt like permanence. He felt like home. We moved in together after 18 months, got a golden retriever named Hatch, argued about cabinet organization and where to spend Thanksgiving and whether the guest bedroom should have a daybed or a pull-out sofa. Normal things, good things. When he proposed on a Tuesday evening, not a grand gesture, just the two of us on the back porch, Hatch asleep at our feet, a ring he'd had sized 3 times because he kept second-guessing himself. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Danielle was my maid of honor. She had been my best friend since college. 11 years of inside jokes, road trips, 2 a.m. phone calls, and the kind of honesty that most people only pretend to offer. She was brilliant and restless and a little reckless, and I loved her for all of it. She and Marcus had always gotten along well. That was something I had once been grateful for. The wedding was set for June. A small venue outside the city. Exposed brick, string lights, 60 guests. Nothing excessive. We had spent 8 months planning it, and by April, everything was in order. That was when things began to shift. Looking back now, I can trace it with uncomfortable precision. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Marcus had always been relaxed about his phone. Left it on the kitchen counter, face up, never flinched when I glanced at it. Sometime in late March, that changed. He started carrying it in his pocket, started angling the screen away. Nothing dramatic, just a small new guardedness that I filed away without examining. Then there was Danielle. She had always been enthusiastic about the wedding, texting me inspiration photos, joining vendor calls, driving 40 minutes to look at floral arrangements with me. But around the same time, Marcus's behavior shifted. Her energy shifted too. She became slightly harder to reach, responses slower, excuses vague. When we did meet, she was present in body but distracted in a way I couldn't name. Once, at a coffee shop on South Congress, I caught her staring at her phone with an expression I didn't recognize on her, something between guilt and hunger. And when she looked up and saw me watching, she smiled too quickly and changed the subject. I told myself I was stressed, that I was projecting pre-wedding anxiety onto the people around me. I told myself that 4 years of trusting Marcus had to mean something. But the body knows. The morning of June 14th, one day before our wedding, I was in the kitchen making coffee. Marcus came downstairs already dressed, which was unusual for a Saturday. He stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, and I remember thinking he looked like a man who had already decided something. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides. He said he needed to talk to me. I set down the coffee pot. He told me he was leaving, that he was in love with Danielle, that it had been going on for several months and he was sorry, but he couldn't go through with the wedding, that he had been trying to find the right time and there was no right time and he was sorry. He said, "I'm sorry," 4 times. I counted. I stood very still. The coffee maker beeped behind me. Hatch lifted his head from his bed in the corner, looked at us both, and put his head back down. Marcus was watching me with the expression of a man braced for an explosion. His hands, I noticed, had started to shake slightly. I walked to the dining room table. I picked up a manila folder that had been sitting there for the past 3 days, tucked beneath a bridal magazine, positioned so casually that no one would think twice about it. I set it on the table between us and pushed it toward him. "I know," I said. "I've known for a month." The color left his face so completely that for a moment he looked like a different person entirely. His hands were no longer just trembling. They were shaking. He reached for the folder but didn't open it yet. His eyes found mine, and in them I saw the exact moment a man realizes that the ambush he thought he was staging had, in fact, been staged on him. I picked up my coffee. I walked back to the kitchen, and I let him stand there. Let me take you back to the beginning of May, because that's where the real story starts. Not in the kitchen on June 14th, but in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon when my world rearranged itself. I had left work early that day with a migraine. Not unusual for crunch season, and we were deep in the final push on a commercial project. I'd texted Marcus that I was heading home, gotten no response, assumed he was in a meeting. I drove home on autopilot, parked in the garage, and walked through the back entrance into the house. The house was quiet. Hatch didn't come to meet me, which meant he was somewhere upstairs. I set my bag on the entry bench and heard something. Not a voice exactly, but a presence. A shift in the air that told me I wasn't alone. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment. Then I heard Danielle laugh. It was a specific laugh. Low, soft, intimate. A laugh I had heard 1,000 times, but never from upstairs, never in my house, never in that particular quiet. I didn't go upstairs. I don't know why, even now. Maybe self-preservation. Maybe some part of me understood that once I walked through that door, there would be no unknowing it, and I needed a few more seconds of the life I had. I walked back out to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes, and then I drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away, ordered a black coffee I didn't drink, and sat at a corner table trying to decide if I was certain or if I was catastrophizing. By the time I drove home 2 hours later, Danielle's car was gone. Marcus was in the kitchen making dinner, cheerful, asking about my migraine, handing me a glass of water. I watched him move through our kitchen like a man with nothing to hide, and I felt something cold settle into my chest. I was certain. The grief came first, and it was total. That night, lying beside Marcus while he slept, I went through every stage in the span of 3 hours. Denial, bargaining, the nauseating replaying of small moments that suddenly meant something different. His new phone habits, Danielle's distance. An evening in March when he had worked late and she had been out of town, and I had spent the night watching television alone and felt vaguely, inexplicably sad. I cried in the bathroom at 3 a.m. with the shower running so he wouldn't hear. But here is what I learned about myself that night. Grief, for me, has a bottom. And when you hit it, you have a choice. You can stay there. Or you can stand up. By morning, I had stopped crying. I had started thinking. The first thing I did was assess what I actually had: a sound, a laugh, a feeling. That was nothing. Not legally, not socially, not practically. I needed more than suspicion. I needed documentation. I am, by profession and by temperament, a project manager. I solve problems by breaking them into components. I build timelines. I identify dependencies. I anticipate failure points. This was, I decided, simply another project, the most important one I had ever managed. Step 1. Evidence. I was not going to confront Marcus without it, because a confrontation without evidence is just an accusation, and an accusation gives the accused time to regroup, spin a narrative, recruit allies. I had watched enough of my friends go through messy breakups and divorces to know how fast the story could turn against the person with the least documentation. Step 2. Finances. Marcus and I had a joint account for household expenses, but I had maintained my own personal account throughout our relationship, a habit my mother had drilled into me. I needed to know exactly where I stood. I needed to move quietly. Step 3. Legal. Our names were on a lease together. We had shared accounts. We had, in the previous year, begun talking about buying property. I needed to understand my exposure before I made any move. Step 4. The wedding itself. $60,000 split approximately down the middle, already spent or committed. Venue, caterer, photographer, flowers, hotel room blocks. I needed to know what could be recovered and what couldn't. I made a list in my phone's notes app, coded in language that would look like a to-do list to anyone who glanced at it. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia, whom I had used for a contract dispute 2 years earlier, and made an appointment for the following Monday, describing it only as a real estate and contract matter. And I started gathering. Patricia's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, overlooking the river. I had always found her manner slightly intimidating. She was precise in the way that people are when they have spent 30 years being paid to be precise. And that Monday morning, I was grateful for it. I told her everything, not with tears. I was past tears, at least in professional settings, but methodically in the order it happened, the way I would present a project status to a senior stakeholder. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she set down her pen. "What do you want?" she asked. "Not what happened, not how do you feel. What do you want?" I told her. I wanted to be legally and financially disentangled from Marcus before he or Danielle knew what I was doing. I wanted to know exactly what I was owed from our shared expenses. I wanted documentation of the affair because I suspected, correctly as it turned out, that Marcus would attempt to reframe the breakdown of our relationship as mutual or as my fault, and I was not going to allow that narrative to take root. Patricia walked me through my options with the efficiency of a surgeon. Joint account. I could not unilaterally drain it, but I could document every transaction and begin withdrawing my proportional contributions. Lease. I was listed as the primary leaseholder. He was secondary. The venue deposit was in my name. The photographer contract was in my name. Most of the vendor contracts we discovered when I pulled out my folder of wedding paperwork were in my name, because I had been the one making the calls, sending the emails, showing up to the tastings. "You're in a stronger position than you think," Patricia said. The evidence came more quickly than I expected, and from a direction I hadn't anticipated. I had set up a shared family calendar with Marcus 2 years earlier, mostly for logistics. He still used it. That week, scrolling back through April and March, I noticed a pattern. On 4 separate Tuesdays, he had blocked his calendar with gym between 6 and 9 p.m. Marcus had not been to a gym consistently in the 2 years I had known him. I checked his gym app, we shared a fitness account, and confirmed he had not badged in on any of those evenings. On the second Tuesday in May, I drove to Danielle's apartment complex at 6:30 p.m. and parked 1 row back from the entrance. His car was there by 6:45. I sat for an hour and a half, nauseous and steady in equal measure, and at 8:17 p.m. I took 12 photographs on my phone. His car, her building's entrance, the timestamp visible on each frame. I did not move. I did not cry. I sat in that car and I thought about the folder I was going to build. 2 days later, I received the last piece I needed, and I hadn't even gone looking for it. Danielle texted me about a bridesmaid fitting, and in the thread, scrolling up to find a date she'd mentioned weeks earlier, I found a gap, a stretch of texts from a Wednesday in April where her responses went from warm and engaged to clipped and monosyllabic within the span of an hour. I had thought nothing of it at the time. Now I zoomed in on the timestamps and recognized the shape of a woman who had just been with someone she shouldn't have been with and needed to get off the phone. It wasn't a smoking gun on its own, but combined with the photographs, the calendar anomalies, and a forwarded email chain from our venue coordinator, which had been mistakenly CC'd to Marcus's personal email and which he had, without telling me, replied to from that account using language that indicated he had been coordinating with someone else about the seating chart, I had enough. I printed everything, organized it chronologically, put it in a manila folder. Meanwhile, something was shifting in their behavior. Marcus had become watchful in a new way, not the guilty wariness of a man carrying a secret, but the sharper alertness of someone who suspects they are being observed. He started asking questions that were slightly too casual. Had I talked to Danielle lately? How was work going? Was I feeling okay? Danielle sent me 2 unprompted thinking of you texts in 1 week. She had never done that before. They were beginning to feel it, that atmospheric change in a house or in a friendship when the other person knows. They didn't know what I knew, but they knew something had tilted. I said nothing. I continued planning the wedding. I confirmed the caterer. I picked up my dress from the alteration shop and hung it on the back of the bedroom door where Marcus could see it every morning. I was not ready to move yet, but I was close. I chose the Wednesday before the wedding to execute. Not because of drama. I have never been interested in drama for its own sake, but because Wednesday gave the vendors enough business day time to process cancellations and adjustments before the weekend, and because it was the last day before Marcus had requested Friday off work. I wanted everything legally in motion before he had 4 consecutive days at home with nothing to do but make phone calls. That morning, I woke at 5, made coffee, and worked through my checklist with the focus of someone diffusing something. First, I called Patricia from my parked car outside the house at 7 a.m. She'd already prepared the lease notice naming Marcus as the party vacating the residence, per our conversation the previous week. I authorized her to proceed. Second, I called the venue. The event coordinator, a kind woman named Beth, had worked with me closely enough over 8 months that when I told her there had been a significant change in circumstances, she didn't push for elaboration. The contract was in my name. I was canceling. Per the terms I had negotiated when we'd booked, cancellations more than 2 weeks out recovered 40% of the deposit. I recovered $2,400. Third, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. The photographer, a contract I had signed as the primary client, released me entirely given the circumstances, and refunded the retainer. She had, as she told me quietly, seen this before. Fourth, I moved my proportional share of our joint account to my personal account, not a dollar more than what I had contributed and could document. Patricia had been clear, clean hands. By noon, I had sent Marcus a single text. "We need to talk when you get home. I'll be here." He arrived at 5:15. He walked through the door with the expression of someone who had been composing himself in the car. Before he could speak, I walked him to the dining room table where the folder was sitting, and I told him to sit down. I laid it out without emotion. The photographs, the calendar, the email chain, the documentation of every financial step I had taken that morning and why I was legally entitled to each one. I told him that Patricia was already handling the lease. I told him the wedding was canceled. I told him he had 30 days to arrange alternative housing per the lease agreement, and that I would not be discussing the dissolution of our relationship further until he had retained his own legal counsel. He went through several things in rapid succession: disbelief, then anger, then a brief, horrible attempt at explanation. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, which I let finish and did not respond to. Then he called Danielle. She arrived 20 minutes later, and that was when the temperature in the room changed. Danielle, I had always known, was better at confrontation than Marcus. She was sharper, quicker, and she fought differently. Not with volume, but with targeted precision. She walked into my house where she'd been conducting an affair, and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as preemptive offense. She told me I was being vindictive, that Marcus and she had fallen in love, and it wasn't something either of them had planned, and I was making this ugly by lawyering up instead of having an adult conversation. She said the money I had moved was technically theft, which it was not, as Patricia had already confirmed, and that if I continued this way, Marcus would contest the lease. Marcus, to his credit or his shame, said nothing. He watched Danielle speak for both of them like a man who had already ceded the floor. "He can contest it," I said. "His attorney and mine can have that conversation." "You're destroying everything over wounded pride," Danielle said. "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." She pushed further, implied that my behavior was embarrassing, that our mutual friends would see it clearly, that I was the one making it a whole thing. I sat across the table from her, and I felt, beneath the anger I was managing, a cold clarity. She had sat in my kitchen, come to my bridal fittings, hugged me after venue tours, and now she was standing in my dining room trying to make me feel small for the crime of defending myself. I picked up the folder. "You're welcome to leave," I said. "Or I can call Patricia and let her know the conversation has escalated. Your choice." They left. I sat in the quiet for a long time afterward. Then I took Hatch for a long walk, ordered Thai food, and put on a show I'd been meaning to watch for 6 months. I gave myself the rest of that week, not to grieve, that was done, but to breathe, because what was coming next was going to require steadiness, and steadiness requires rest. The first message came from Marcus on Friday evening. It was long. I could tell from the notification preview, which showed the first line. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I handled this wrong from the beginning. I didn't open it until Saturday morning, and when I did, I read it with the same attention I would give a client's revision notes, analytically, searching for meaning beneath the language. It was, in structure, an apology, but it was the kind of apology that is also a negotiation. He was sorry for how things had been handled. He acknowledged he should have come to me sooner. He said he still cared about me deeply and didn't want things to end like this. He asked if we could talk, just talk, before lawyers got involved in everything. What he was asking, I understood, was for a pause, a window, an opportunity to soft land a situation that was currently in legal freefall. I forwarded the message to Patricia and replied to Marcus with 4 words. Please contact my attorney. Danielle's approach was different. She didn't text. She showed up at my office building on Monday at lunchtime and waited in the lobby. My assistant called up to tell me a woman named Danielle was asking for me. I thought about it for a moment, then told him I was in a meeting. She waited for 40 minutes and left. There was something almost mathematical about watching them try to solve me. They were working with an incomplete model of who I was, a version of Claire built from 4 years of ease and trust and the assumption that I would, at bottom, prefer harmony to conflict. They kept applying pressure to that model. They did not yet understand that the model had been updated. What kept me steady during those days was not toughness, it was people. My sister Renata lived in Denver and called me every evening that week, not to offer advice. She had learned over the years that I didn't want advice. I wanted someone to think out loud with, but to listen, and occasionally to say things that made me laugh about things that were not funny. She was 4 years older than me and had been through her own version of this story a decade earlier, and she had that specific, hard-won calm of a person who has already survived something. The other person was my therapist, Dr. Farhan, whom I had seen intermittently for 3 years. I booked a session for Tuesday evening. Sitting in her small office with its one succulent and its good lamp, I talked through not the practical steps, those were under control, but the strange grief of losing 2 people at once. Not Marcus, really. I had been losing Marcus for months, perhaps longer. But Danielle. The loss of Danielle was specific and ugly and didn't resolve cleanly the way anger could. You're mourning the friendship, Dr. Farhan said. That's separate from the betrayal, and it's allowed to be. I stayed with that for a while. I also, that week, told 2 of my closest friends, Elena and Maya. I told them once, clearly, factually. I wasn't performing devastation. I wasn't recruiting them as soldiers. I simply told them what had happened and let them decide what they wanted to do with that information. They decided independently to be on my side. That was their choice, and it mattered more than I would have predicted. By the end of that week, I was not happy. I won't pretend that rest and support had resolved the fact that my engagement had ended 48 hours before my wedding, but I was clear. I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it. I was not acting from panic or spite. That made me, I understood, considerably harder to stop. They came together, which I had not expected. It was a Saturday afternoon, 2.5 weeks after the canceled wedding, and I had just come back from a run when I saw Marcus's car in front of the house. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing, watching through the window of the car as both of them saw me see them. Neither of them moved. Neither did I. We held that strange, suspended moment for a few seconds before I turned and walked to the front door. A car passed on the street. A neighbor's sprinkler ticked. Life went on around the edges of something that felt enormous. I went inside, washed my face, put on clean clothes, let them wait 5 minutes before I opened the door. "We just want to talk," Marcus said. "No lawyers, just the 3 of us." Danielle was behind him, and she was performing something I recognized from years of watching her in social situations. Warmth as strategy, the particular softness she deployed when she needed something. I had watched her use it on landlords, on difficult relatives, on men she wanted something from at parties. I had always found it impressive. Now I found it instructive. Her voice when she said Claire was the voice of an old friend, rich with history and carefully constructed sincerity. I stepped back and let them in because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to know exactly what they thought they were doing. They sat on the couch. I sat across from them in the armchair. My armchair, the one I'd had before Marcus moved in, the one with the slightly worn left armrest. I did not offer anything to drink. Danielle spoke first, and she was, I'll give her this, skilled. She acknowledged the hurt I had experienced. She said she understood why I'd made the choices I had made, and that if she were in my position, she might have done similar things. She said she and Marcus had talked extensively, and they both agreed that the situation had gotten out of hand legally, and that it didn't need to be this complicated. She said that fighting over money and contracts was beneath all of us, and she didn't want to see me spend the next year of my life tangled up in something painful when I could be moving forward. It was a generous speech. It was also a speech designed to make me feel that forward motion required signing away my rights. Then Marcus spoke. He said he was willing to settle everything fairly. He had with him, and here he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, a one-page document, which he set on the coffee table between us. I looked at it without touching it. It was a mutual release agreement. Boilerplate, but specific boilerplate. Both parties agreed to waive claims against the other arising from the dissolution of the relationship, return to the joint account any funds withdrawn unilaterally, and agree not to disparage the other party to mutual friends, colleagues, or on social media. I looked up at him, then at her. "Who drafted this?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. A friend helped. A lawyer friend? Another hesitation. I sat back. This document asks me to return money I am legally entitled to, waive any future claims, which, depending on what Patricia finds in the vendor contracts, I may have, and agree not to say anything negative about either of you. In exchange for what, exactly? For this being over, Danielle said, and there was the first clean note of her actual feeling. Impatience, tightly controlled. "It's already over," I said. "I ended it." "You're making this harder than it has to be," Marcus said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with an expression I had once found appealing, earnest, direct, the face of a man who believed in himself. "We were together 4 years, Claire. We built something. I made a mistake. Danielle made a mistake. But we're all going to have to live in the same city, see the same people. You don't want this to become a whole thing." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. Quietly. Not a performance. A genuine question. He pulled back. "No, Because if you're suggesting that how I respond to your affair will determine how the people in our shared social circle treat me, that's a threat, and I'd like you to be clear about what you mean." The room was quiet. A truck went by outside. The refrigerator hummed. Hatch, from somewhere down the hallway, shifted in his sleep. The ordinary sounds of a house that was still standing. Danielle's performance of warmth had gone somewhere else. What was in her face now was harder, more honest, and finally, more accurate. "Sign the paper," she said. "It's better for everyone." "Not for me," I said. I stood up. "I'd like you both to leave." Marcus picked up the document from the table. His jaw was tight. He folded it once, precisely, and put it back in his pocket. A gesture that felt more defeated than threatening, though I noticed he didn't tear it up. He was, I understood, still holding on to the idea that I might change my mind, that I might wake up at 3 in the morning, feel the weight of the conflict, and call him to negotiate. Danielle stood, and in that moment she looked at me with something I had never seen from her directed at me in 11 years. Contempt. Not manufactured, real. The kind that only lives behind a face for a long time before it surfaces. And once it surfaces, you wonder how you never saw it before. "You're going to regret this," she said. I opened the front door. "Good night." They left. I closed the door, locked it, and stood in the hallway with my back against the wall. My heart was hammering. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. There was something frightening about watching people I had loved reveal themselves so completely, and something frightening about having said no when everything in my nervous system was trained to smooth things over. 11 years of friendship, 4 years of love, both of them in my living room, looking at me like I was an obstacle. But the fear felt different from how I'd expected. It didn't make me want to retreat. It felt like proof that I was in exactly the right place in this fight. Fear means the stakes are real, and the stakes were real. I went to the kitchen, made tea, and called Patricia, first thing Monday morning. The meeting was Patricia's idea. She'd been in communication with Marcus's attorney, a young man named Garrett who was, she told me with the particular dry satisfaction of a woman who has been practicing law for 3 decades, enthusiastic. Garrett had sent several strongly worded letters in the 2 weeks following the document incident, citing Claire's bad faith conduct in withdrawing funds and canceling contracts unilaterally, threatening civil action on grounds that Patricia described to me as creative. She had read me one of the letters over the phone with the tone of someone reading a child's attempt at a formal essay. Not unkind, simply accurate. Patricia suggested a 4-way meeting, herself, me, Garrett, and Marcus, an attempt at resolution before anyone spent money on formal litigation. I agreed. I also, the morning of the meeting, spent 40 minutes reviewing my folder at my kitchen table with coffee, Hatch asleep under my chair, the early September light coming through the window at a low, clean angle. I went through every document in order, not because I had forgotten anything, I hadn't, but because I wanted the sequence of it in my body, not just my head. I wanted to sit in that conference room and feel the weight of it without needing to think. The meeting was in a conference room on the 3rd floor of Patricia's building. I arrived 10 minutes early. Patricia was already there, setting papers out with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I sat down, smoothed my jacket, and drank a glass of water. The room had the particular neutrality of spaces designed for conflict. Neutral carpet, neutral walls, a long table with chairs on both sides, a window overlooking the parking garage. Marcus and Garrett arrived together. Garrett was younger than I'd imagined, mid-30s, a suit that was slightly too formal for the occasion, the particular energy of someone who had prepared extensively and wanted you to know it. Marcus, beside him, looked like a man who had not slept well in several weeks. I recognized the specific quality of that exhaustion, not physical, but the exhaustion of carrying a story that was getting harder to maintain. And behind them, which I had not anticipated and which Patricia met with a single raised eyebrow, was Danielle. She had no legal standing to be in this meeting. She knew it. Patricia knew it. The fact that she had come anyway told me everything I needed to know about how confident they actually were. She sat one chair removed from Marcus, slightly back from the table, as if occupying the role of observer rather than participant. I looked at her once. She met my eyes without expression. I looked away. Garrett opened with a rehearsed statement about Marcus's contributions to the relationship, the collaborative nature of the wedding planning, and the unilateral financial decisions Claire had made that had caused Marcus significant harm. He used the word harm 4 times in 3 minutes. He suggested that my actions had been emotionally reactive and driven by a desire to punish rather than resolve. It was a competent argument in the same way that a competent argument can be built on a foundation with no load-bearing wall. Patricia let him finish. She did not write anything while he spoke. She simply listened with the expression of a woman who has heard every version of this argument and has long since stopped being surprised by any of them. Then she opened her file. She walked through the contract documentation, every vendor agreement signed in my name, the legal basis for each cancellation, the exact dollar amounts recovered, and the contractual basis for each recovery. She walked through the financial records, the joint account contributions, the withdrawals, the calculations. She cited 3 specific precedents for the legitimacy of my actions under Texas contract law. She was not theatrical. She was thorough in the way that only very experienced people can be thorough, without urgency, without performance, with the simple confidence of someone who knows the ground beneath her feet. Then she nodded to me. I placed the photographs on the table. 12 prints, organized in order by date, each with a visible timestamp in the lower right corner. These are time-stamped photographs of Mr. Harlan's vehicle at Miss Reyes's apartment building on 4 separate Tuesdays between March and May, I said. My voice was level. I had practiced being level. They are accompanied by calendar records showing Mr. Harlan claiming to be at the gym during those time periods, and fitness app data confirming no gym check-ins on any of those 4 evenings. Garrett looked at his client. Marcus was looking at the photographs with the expression of a man watching something he cannot stop, something that has been in motion for weeks, that he has been hoping might somehow not arrive at this particular table in this particular room. Additionally, I said, and I removed the email chain, the one where Marcus had replied to the venue coordinator from his personal account, coordinating with someone about seating arrangements. This correspondence indicates that Mr. Harlan was communicating with a third party about our wedding logistics without my knowledge, during a period when he claims he had not yet made a decision about the relationship. That doesn't, Marcus started. It demonstrates a pattern, Patricia said, which is relevant to the question of good faith in the dissolution of the partnership. Danielle, who had been silent in her chair slightly to Marcus's left, spoke. "This is character assassination," she said. "You're trying to humiliate him." Her voice was composed, but there was an edge underneath it, the specific edge of someone who had expected to sit in this room as a silent witness to a manageable conversation, and was now watching the room become something else entirely. "Ms. Reyes," Patricia said, in a tone that made clear her presence was already being tolerated on thin terms, "you are not a party to this meeting." "She's the reason for it," Danielle said. "Then perhaps," Patricia said, "she would like to consult her own attorney about her exposure to a tortious interference claim. I'd be happy to discuss that separately, today or at another time, entirely her choice." The silence that followed was a very specific kind of silence, the kind that happens when a room full of people recalibrates simultaneously. Garrett looked at Danielle. Danielle looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the table, at the photographs of his car parked outside another woman's apartment building, at the documentation of a story that had belonged only to the 3 of us for months and now belonged irrevocably to a conference room. "The situation is straightforward," Patricia continued. "My client has not acted in bad faith. She has acted within her contractual and financial rights at every step. She has documentation of the conduct that precipitated this dissolution. She has not, to date, shared that documentation with anyone outside of this room and her legal counsel. She is prepared to continue that discretion in exchange for a clean and uncontested resolution. Garrett asked for a brief recess. The three of them huddled in the hallway. I watched through the glass partition. Not their expressions. I wasn't close enough for that, but their body language. Garrett spoke with his hands, the way people do when they are recalibrating a position they had not expected to need to recalibrate. Danielle was very still. Marcus had his back to me. They were in the hallway for 11 minutes. I drank another glass of water. Patricia made a note on her legal pad and said nothing. The city moved outside the window. A helicopter passed somewhere in the distance. When they came back, Marcus sat down heavily. His lawyer looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the meeting. Danielle was not with them. She had, apparently, decided that her presence was no longer useful. "What does a clean resolution look like?" Garrett asked. Patricia told him. The agreement took 3 weeks to finalize, which is, Patricia told me, extremely fast for a dissolution of this complexity. It was fast because Marcus had very little ground to stand on, and following the meeting appeared to understand that. Garrett's letters after the conference room had a notably different tone, less declarative, more inquiring. Patricia described the shift to me over the phone with characteristic understatement. "He's found the floor." I wrote that down. It seemed useful. I will not reproduce the legal language here. It wasn't interesting. But the practical terms were these. Marcus vacated the residence by the agreed date. He removed his belongings in 2 trips, both times when I was at work, which I had stipulated and which he accepted without argument. I came home on the second evening to a house that was quieter and more mine than it had been in years. His half of the closet was empty. The spare toothbrush was gone. A small nail hole in the hallway wall marked where he'd hung a photograph of us at a friend's lake house, taken 2 summers ago. I ran my thumb across it once, then went to make dinner. Hatch had taken to sleeping in the middle of the living room floor, spread eagle, occupying space with an ease that I found disproportionately comforting. He had always deferred to Marcus's preferred side of the couch. He did not defer anymore. The financial settlement confirmed that my withdrawals from the joint account were legitimate and required no repayment. Marcus's good faith claim was dropped without further action and without any payment from me in either direction. 2 vendors, the caterer and the rental company, had retained cancellation fees that were contractually binding regardless of circumstances, and those losses were split according to the contribution percentages Patricia had documented over the previous month. I came out slightly ahead of the midpoint, which was all I had asked for. Not everything, just what was mine. There was no disparagement clause in the final agreement. I had refused it, clearly and early, and Patricia had made the argument, correctly, that a clause preventing me from speaking about my own experience was not something I was obligated to accept in exchange for nothing. Marcus's attorney had pushed on this point for nearly a week, returning to it twice in written exchanges with increasingly creative framing. Patricia waited them out. She was, I had learned, exceptionally good at waiting. The clause was dropped. In its place was simply no clause. I could speak. I chose, in the immediate aftermath, to speak only to the people who mattered. I sent a brief factual message to the 60 people who had been invited to the wedding, most of whom had already guessed from the canceled invitations and the silence that followed that something serious had occurred. The message said that the wedding would not be proceeding, that Marcus and I had ended our relationship and that I appreciated their warmth and support over the months of planning. I said nothing about Danielle. I did not name a reason. I did not have to. People, it turns out, are observant. Danielle had been my maid of honor. Her name was absent from my message. She and Marcus were now appearing together at places they both frequented. These things, laid side by side, required no editorial assistance. The social fallout was not something I engineered. I want to be clear about that because I think there is a version of this story where I become someone who ran a campaign, who lobbied mutual friends, who shaped the narrative from a war room. I didn't. I told the truth to the people I trusted, and I let the rest move at its own pace. But I will be honest. I observed it with a certain grim, quiet satisfaction. Several of our mutual friends withdrew from Marcus and Danielle gradually, in the way that communities reassert their values when they have witnessed a betrayal, not with confrontation, not with sides or declarations, but with a slow, natural cooling. Declined invitations, conversations in which they were no longer included. The particular social temperature that settles around people who have done something that others privately but clearly understand. Elena, who had a gift for honest reporting, told me that at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in August, Marcus had attempted to characterize the end of our relationship as a mutual decision, a growing apart, a recognition of incompatibility, the kind of narrative that asks people to accept that no one did anything to anyone. Nobody had directly contradicted him. People rarely do in those settings. But the table had not, she said, been warm. There was a specific quality of polite distance that people who know you deploy when they have decided something about you but are too civil to say it. Marcus had encountered that quality. He had, to his credit, read the room well enough to stop talking about it. Danielle fared worse. People are more forgiving in complicated ways of men who stray than of women who betray their close friends. A double standard I have complicated feelings about, but one which in this particular case operated straightforwardly. Several women in our circle, women who had known Danielle and me together for years, women who had come to bridal showers and birthday dinners and late-night conversations in which Danielle had positioned herself as one of the great advocates of loyalty, quietly stepped back. There was no dramatic reckoning. There didn't need to be. The math was visible to anyone paying attention. On the last day of the legal process, Patricia and I shook hands in the lobby of her building. She said, as I was turning to leave, "You handled this well." It was not an effusive statement. From her, it was the highest available praise. I thanked her. I walked out into the September sun and sat on a bench outside the building for about 5 minutes, doing nothing in particular. The city moved around me. A woman walked by with a stroller. A man on a bicycle ran a red light. A group of people laughed about something outside the coffee shop across the street. That particular bright, unconscious laughter of people who are simply having a Thursday. I listened to it and felt something I hadn't expected to feel so cleanly, so soon. Relief, not triumph. Relief, the specific physical lightness of a thing that is finished. I was 32 years old. I had $60,000 of wedding that hadn't happened, a lease I was renegotiating in my name only, a dog who now slept in the center of the living room as if he owned it, a job I was good at, and a folder full of documents I intended to put in a box in the back of a closet and never look at again. It was, I thought, sitting in that September light, an extremely good place to start. The year after the dissolution, I repainted the bedroom. a warm gray I'd been wanting since we moved in, and Marcus had preferred white. I bought a new bed frame, rearranged the bookshelves, small things, and that was exactly why they mattered. I was reclaiming the texture of ordinary life, the accumulation of small preferences that make a space yours. I stayed in Austin. Leaving would have meant surrendering a city I loved to people who didn't deserve to drive me out of it. I had friends here, work I was good at, a neighborhood where the coffee shop knew my order, and the park trail I had run 100 times and intended to run 100 more. The architecture firm moved me onto a large-scale, mixed-use project that fall, the most complex thing I'd managed in my career, and the intensity of it was genuinely useful. Being good at something when other parts of your life are rebuilding has a specific, stabilizing quality. I began seeing someone the following spring. His name was Daniel, a civil engineer I met through Elena. Quiet in the way that some people are quiet because they're paying attention. We took things slowly, and that was exactly right. I don't know yet where it goes, and I find, somewhat to my own surprise, that I'm comfortable not knowing. Marcus and Danielle moved in together 4 months after the dissolution. As the months passed, I thought about them less and less, and the thinking, when it came, lost its heat. They had become simply people who had made choices, living with the consequences. By the following spring, things between them were not easy. The intensity that had driven them together, the secrecy, the transgression, didn't translate into the flatness of daily life. Marcus was excellent at beginnings. Danielle needed to be chosen, pursued, to be the most important thing in the room. These qualities didn't age well together once the thrill had settled into the ordinary work of being with someone. She left him that summer. Elena ran into him at a grocery store and told me he looked tired. I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was quieter than that, a confirmation that what is built on betrayal tends not to hold, not because the universe is just, but because foundations matter. You cannot build a life on the rubble of someone else's and expect it to stand. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Your dignity is the one thing no one can take from you without your permission. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I stayed clear. Betrayal tells you who people are. Documentation tells you what happened. And silence, when it's chosen rather than forced, that's power. What would you have done, standing in that kitchen, folder in hand? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.